You ever have someone look at you like you're invisible, like you're just less, well, let me tell you about the time my own son thought I was poor and his in-laws tried to humiliate me at dinner. Little did they know I make $40,000 a month. But that night, I decided to play along and pretend I was broke. Oh, the looks on their faces. Let's get one thing straight right from the start. I am not what you'd call flashy. I don't drive a Tesla. I don't have a closet full of designer handbags. And I certainly don't wear diamonds to the grocery store. In fact, if you saw me at the local supermarket, you'd probably think I was just another middle-aged woman trying to remember if she needed eggs or milk. And honestly, I like it that way. I've always believed that money is like underwear, necessary but not something you need to show off in public. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not struggling, far from it, actually. I run a business from home. Nothing glamorous, just a little online operation. I started a few years back. It's grown into something I'm pretty proud of, and it brings in about $40,000 a month. Yes, you heard that right. $40,000 every month. But you wouldn't know it by looking at me. I still clip coupons, I still wear the same sneakers I bought in 2012. They're broken and just right, thank you very much. And I still get a little thrill when I find a good deal at the thrift store. Maybe it's the way I was raised, or maybe it's just who I am. But I've never felt the need to broadcast my bank account to the world. My son, on the other hand, seems to have missed that memo. Bless his heart. He's always been a little oblivious when it comes to money. He grew up with everything he needed, but not everything he wanted. And I think that's made him a bit, well, cautious. He's the type who worries about whether I'm getting by, even though I've told him 100 times that I'm just fine. Maybe it's because I don't splurge on fancy vacations or new cars. Maybe it's because I still make my own coffee instead of stopping at Starbucks every morning, or maybe it's just because I'm his mom and he can't help but worry. So when he called me one afternoon, his voice a little higher than usual, I knew something was up. "Mom," he said, "I have some news now." As a mother, you know that tone. It's the same one he used when he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, or when he brought home a stray dog. I braced myself. Turns out the news was that he was getting serious with his girlfriend. Fiancé, actually, as of last week, and her family wanted to meet me. They're having a dinner at their house next Saturday. He said they're really looking forward to meeting you. I could hear the nerves in his voice, and I couldn't help but smile. My little boy, all grown up and trying to impress the in-laws. "Of course, honey." I said, "Should I bring my famous potato salad? That's my go-to for family gatherings. It's the kind of dish that says I care, but I'm not trying too hard. Plus, everyone loves it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mom, maybe just come as you are and, don't be embarrassed if they talk about money. They're really wealthy." Excuse me. Me embarrassed? I almost laughed out loud. I wanted to tell him, "Sweetheart, I could buy and sell half the people in this town if I wanted to, but I bit my tongue." I knew what he meant. Some people wear their wealth like a badge of honor, and others, like me, prefer to keep it tucked away like a secret recipe. But as I hung up the phone, I started to think, what was it about money that made people act so strange? Why did my son assume I'd be embarrassed? And why did I feel a little thrill at the idea of meeting these so-called wealthy in-laws? Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was a little bit of mischief, or maybe deep down I wanted to see what would happen if I let them believe I was just an ordinary struggling mom. That's when the idea hit me. What if just for one night I let them think I was broke? Not destitute, mind you. Just average, no mention of my business. No talk of investments. Or real estate, just me, my old sneakers and my potato salad. What's the worst that could happen? Maybe they'd look down their noses at me. Maybe they'd try to help me, or offer me advice on how to stretch a dollar. Or maybe they'd see past the surface and get to know the real me. I'll admit, the thought made me a little nervous. I've always prided myself on being independent, on not needing anyone's approval, but there's something about meeting your child's future, in-laws, that brings out all your old insecurities. Would they judge me for not having a fancy car? Would they think less of me because I didn't wear designer clothes? Would they see me as less than because I didn't flaunt my success? But then I remembered something my mother used to say: people will judge you no matter what you do, so you might as well give them something to talk about. And with that, I decided I'd go to the dinner, play the part, and see what happened. After all, life's too short to take yourself too seriously, and who knows, maybe I'd learn a thing or two about these wealthy folks, and maybe, just maybe, they'd learn something about me. So I pulled out my old cardigan, dusted off my sneakers, and started making a grocery list for my potato salad. Next Saturday couldn't come soon enough. It's Saturday evening, and I'm standing in front of my closet, holding up my gardening jeans and a cardigan with a hole in the sleeve. Now let me ask you, would you have done the same, or am I just crazy? I mean, I could have worn my one nice dress, but that would have ruined the whole experiment. So I slipped into my most comfortable jeans, the ones with a little dirt stain on the knee that just won't come out, and that old cardigan I can't seem to part with. I even left my hair in its usual ponytail. No makeup except a little lipstick for good measure. I looked in the mirror and thought, well, this is as broke as I get. I grabbed my potato salad, still warm from the oven, and headed out the door. Driving up to the in-laws' house was like pulling into a movie set. Their home was perched on a hill behind a set of iron gates that probably cost more than my first car. The driveway was lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and a fountain that looked like it belonged in Rome. I parked my sensible sedan between a Mercedes and a Range Rover, took a deep breath, and walked up to the front door, potato salad in hand. The door swung open before I could even knock. Mrs-in-law stood there, tall and thin-dressed, in something that looked like it came straight off a Paris runway. She gave me the kind of up-and-down look you usually reserve for stray cats on your porch. "Oh, you must be her mother," she said, as if she'd just bitten into a lemon. I smiled and held out my potato salad. I brought something for dinner. I said she took it with 2 fingers like it might bite her, and disappeared into the kitchen. Inside the house was straight out of a magazine, marble floors, gold faucets, chandeliers, that probably cost more than my entire kitchen remodel. I tried not to gawk, but honestly, who needs that many mirrors? Mr-in-law appeared all smiles and handshakes, but there was something in his eyes, a kind of polite curiosity, like he was trying to figure out if I was lost. "Did you find the place okay?" he asked, as if I'd never seen a gated community before. I wanted to tell him I'd been to fancier places in my time, but I just nodded and said, "No trouble at all." We made our way to the living room where my son and his fiancée were waiting. He looked nervous. She looked apologetic, and I just tried to keep my cool. The conversation started off polite enough, weather, traffic, the usual small talk. But it didn't take long for things to get interesting. Mrs-in-law launched into a story about their latest trip to Paris, complete with details about the 5-star hotel, the private tour of the Louvre, and the quaint little bistro where they dined with a famous artist. Mr-in-law chimed in about their art collection, dropping names I'd only ever seen in magazines. Then came the talk of their modest vacation home in Aspen, which from the sound of it was anything but modest. I nodded and smiled, making mental notes for later. Pattern interrupt. "Have you ever been in a room where you felt like a tourist? In your own country?" Then, as if on cue, Mrs-in-law turned to me and asked, "So what do you do for a living?" The room went quiet. My son shot me a look, half pleading, half terrified. I shrugged and said, "Oh, just a little online business. Nothing fancy. You should have seen their faces." Mrs-in-law's eyebrows shot up so high, I thought they might disappear into her hairline. Mr-in-law gave a polite little nod, but I could practically hear him thinking, "Poor thing," from that moment on. It was like I'd been cast in a play where my role was the struggling single mom. They started talking slower, as if I might not understand. They explained things in excruciating detail, how the stock market works, what a trust fund is, the difference between a Roth IRA and a traditional one. I wanted to laugh, but I just smiled and nodded, playing my part. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have doubled as a ballroom. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses, and there were more forks than I knew what to do with. I sat at the end next to my son, who kept squeezing my hand under the table. The conversation turned to charity work, how important it is to give back, how rewarding it is to help those less fortunate. Mrs-in-law glanced at me every time she said, less fortunate, as if I was the poster child for poverty. At one point, Mr-in-law asked if I'd ever travelled abroad. I told him I'd been to Canada once, which technically is true. He smiled sympathetically and said, "Well, maybe someday you'll get to see more of the world." I bit my tongue to keep from telling him about the time. I spent a month in Italy, learning to cook from a real Italian grandmother, but that would have ruined the fun. By dessert, I was starting to feel like a contestant on a reality she. "How, who wants to be a millionaire's mother-in-law?" They asked if I needed help finding a better job, if I'd considered going back to school, if I wanted advice on budgeting. I thanked them politely, all the while thinking, if only you knew. As I helped clear the table, Mrs-in-law pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't worry, dear. We'll make sure our daughter is taken care of. Money isn't everything, you know." I smiled, thanked her, and wondered how she'd react if she saw my bank statement. Driving home that night, I couldn't help but laugh. The whole evening had been a disaster, but in a way it was also a revelation. People see what they want to see, and sometimes the best way to show them who you are is to let them underestimate you. After all, the real power isn't in what you have, it's in knowing who you are, no matter what anyone else thinks. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a backhanded compliment, you know the feeling it's like. Someone hands you a beautiful bouquet of roses, but when you reach for it, you realize it's full of thorns. That's exactly how I felt when Mrs-in-law leaned over, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was kindness, and said, "Don't worry, dear, we'll make sure our daughter is taken care of. Money isn't everything, you know." I almost choked on my water, the nerve. I wanted to ask her if she practiced that line in the mirror or if it just came naturally, but I smiled, nodded and took another sip, pretending not to notice the way my son's fiancé's eyes darted between us, silently pleading for me not to make a scene. But that was just the beginning. The real show was about to start as the plates were cleared, and the conversation turned to life's little challenges. Mrs-in-law and her husband seemed to take it upon themselves to educate me on the fine art of surviving on a shoestring. You know, there are so many wonderful resources out there for people in your situation. Mrs-in-law began her tone as gentle as a nurse, talking to a patient who's just woken up from surgery. "Have you ever looked into government assistance? There's no shame in it. You know, sometimes we all need a little help." I wanted to laugh, cry, and throw my potato salad all at once. Instead, I just nodded, as if I was taking mental notes. Mr-in-law, not to be outdone, chimed in with his own pearls of wisdom. "You know, I read an article just the other day about how to stretch $1. It's amazing what you can do with a little creativity. Have you ever tried meal planning or shopping at discount stores?" I bit my tongue so hard I thought I might draw blood. If only he knew that. I could buy the entire discount store if I wanted to, but I just happen to like a good bargain. There's a difference between being frugal and being desperate, but I didn't bother explaining why, ruin their fun. The advice kept coming like a never-ending infomercial. "You know, there are some great budgeting apps out there," Mrs-in-law continued, her eyes wide with concern. "And don't be afraid to ask for help. We're family now, after all." I glanced at my son, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. His fiancée squeezed his hand, her face flushed with embarrassment. I almost felt sorry for her, but here's the thing, ladies. Have you ever felt that sting, that fear, that maybe you aren't enough, that someone's judging you for what you don't have instead of who you are? It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. I sat there listening to their well-meaning advice, and for a moment I felt small. I remembered all the times I'd been underestimated, all the times people had looked at me and seen only what was on the surface. It's a special kind of pain, the kind that makes you question yourself, even when you know better. I thought about my own mother, who raised 3 kids on her own, and never once let anyone make her feel less than. She taught me that dignity isn't something you can buy, and self-worth doesn't come with a price tag, but sitting at that table, surrounded by people who measured everything in dollars and cents, I felt the old insecurities creeping in. Was I really doing enough? Was I good enough for my son, for his fiancée, for this new family I was about to join? But then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the way Mrs-in-law patted my hand, as if I was a lost puppy. Maybe it was the way Mr-in-law smiled, so sure of his own generosity. Or maybe it was just the absurdity of the whole situation. Here I was, a woman who'd built a successful business from scratch, who'd weathered storms and come out stronger, being lectured on how to save money on groceries. The irony was almost too much to bear, so I decided to lean in. I asked questions, nodded along, and even took out my phone to write down some of their suggestions. "Oh, that's a great idea," I said when Mrs. In-law suggested I buy in bulk to save money. "I'll have to try that." I could see the satisfaction in her eyes, the way she puffed up with pride at being so helpful. It was almost comical. But underneath the humor, there was a real lesson. People will always judge you no matter what you do. They'll make assumptions, offer advice you didn't ask for, and sometimes they'll try to make themselves feel better by making you feel small, but the truth is their opinions don't define you. Only you can do that as the evening wore on. I found myself growing stronger, not weaker. Every patronizing comment, every well-meaning suggestion was like armor. I realized that I didn't need their approval or anyone else's. I knew who I was, and I knew what I was worth, and that my friends is something no amount of money can buy. By the time dessert was served, I was almost enjoying myself. I played my part to perfection, letting them believe whatever they wanted. But inside, I was already planning my next move, because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the best revenge is living well. And sometimes letting people underestimate you is the sweetest victory of all. After dinner, as the last crumbs of dessert were being cleared, and the awkwardness of the eye. Venning still hung in the air like a heavy perfume, my son quietly tugged at my sleeve. He led me into the hallway, away from the clinking of crystal and the low hum of his fiancée's parents discussing their next vacation. His face was flushed, his eyes darting nervously. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "They can be mean, intense. I didn't know they'd be like this. I just wanted tonight to go. Well..." I looked at him, my sweet boy, all grown up, still worrying about his mother. I reached out, squeezed his hand, and gave him a smile that I hoped would reassure him. "Honey, I'm fine. But maybe it's time they knew the real me." I could see the relief and confusion flicker across his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but I was already turning back toward the dining room, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd played my part long enough. I'd let them have their fun, let them believe whatever they wanted to believe. But now it was time to set the record straight, not out of spite, but out of pride, not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly dismissed. I walked back into the room, my steps steady, my head held high. The in-laws were still seated at the table, Mrs. In-law dabbing at her lips with a linen napkin, Mr. In-law swirling the last of his wine. They looked up as I entered, their faces polite but distant, as if they'd already filed me away in their minds as the poor relation. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and looked Mrs. In-law right in the eye. "You know?" I began, my voice calm but clear. "I actually do pretty well for myself." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to pause, waiting for what would come next. I run a business that brings in about $40,000 a month. I just don't feel the need to show it off. For a moment, no one moved. Mrs. In-law's hand froze mid-air, her napkin suspended like a white flag. Mr. In-law's glass stopped halfway to his lips. My son's FEA. NCE's eyes widened, her mouth forming a perfect little "Oh," and my son, well, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. I almost laughed at the sight, but I kept my composure, letting the truth settle over the room like a fresh breeze. Suddenly the power shifted. I could feel it, as real and tangible as the marble beneath my feet. The in-laws' jaws dropped, their carefully constructed world of assumptions and judgments crumbling in an instant. All those little comments, the patronizing advice, the sideways glances, they all seemed to shrink, to lose their weight. I watched as Mrs. In-law struggled to find her words, her face flushing a deep shade of red. "Oh," she stammered. "Well, I had no idea." I smiled, not unkindly. "Most people don't. I've always believed that money is something you use, not something you wear." I like my old jeans and I love a good bargain, but that doesn't mean I'm struggling. It just means I know what matters to me. Mr-in-law cleared his throat suddenly, very interested in the pattern of the tablecloth. That's impressive, he managed, his voice a little shaky. Very impressive. I could see the wheels turning in his head, recalculating, reassessing. For the first time all evening, he looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me. My son, bless him, looked like he just discovered a secret superhero identity, Mom. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. I reached over and squeezed his hand because, sweetheart, I wanted you to know me for who. I am not what I have, and I wanted you to see that happiness doesn't come from things. It comes from knowing your own worth. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The in-laws were suddenly eager to hear about my business, asking questions with a new kind of respect. Mrs-in-law even complimented my potato salad, though I suspect she was just trying to recover some dignity. My son's fiancé looked at me with a new kind of admiration, and my son, well, he just kept shaking his head, a smile spreading across his face as I drove home that night. The city lights twinkling outside my window, I felt 10 feet tall. Not because I'd put anyone in their place, but because I'd finally claimed my own. I thought about all the women I knew, friends, sisters, mothers who'd been underestimated, who'd been told they weren't enough, who'd been judged by what they wore or where they lived. I wished I could gather them all in a room and tell them what I'd learned, that your worth isn't measured by your bank account, your car, or your clothes. It's measured by your courage, your kindness, and your ability to stand tall in the face of judgment. So if you've ever felt small, if you've ever been underestimated, remember this: you are more powerful than you know, and sometimes the best way to show it is to let the world see you just as you are. So ladies, next time someone tries to put you in a box, remember you define your worth, not your bank account or your shoes. Never mistake quiet for weakness. A woman's strength isn't in what she shows, it's in what she chooses to reveal. Let them laugh. The truth always comes dressed in silence. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Tears and Strength and share this video with your friends.